All right, welcome to Grounded with John Tester and Maritza Georgia. We're working on kind of a double episode week for you again this week. We're going to talk all things public lands later this week with former Bureau of Land Management Director Tracy Stone Manning. She's also a fellow Montanan senator.
Yeah, she's a good person. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, she used to work for me back in the early days of my Senate offices. So it'll be good to hear from her again. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but for today, the economy just persists. It continues to be top of mind this week. We've pretty much quit talking about Signalgate, which says something because that's still something a lot of people are calling for to be investigated. But we wanted to invite economist and University of Michigan public policy scholar Justin Wolfers to join our conversation, and we'll bring him in here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, it'll be, the economy, it's always the economy, especially when you see what's transpired over the last few weeks with the tariffs and the talk of tariff before that, and the uncertainty that brings to everybody, including business, and how to adjust, how to make sure that the impacts of the tariffs are minimized on people who are buying products. And then there's the whole thing about what the plan is, because everybody says, well, we got this plan. I haven't figured out what the plan is. I don't know if the plan is to get more trade with China. I don't know if the plan is to get more manufacturing back in the U.S., because I think in both cases, it's a different world than it was in the 1950s as far as getting manufacturing back. As far as more trade with China, I think we need more countries around the world helping us with this. And quite honestly, it started with the vice president and the G7 bad-mouthing all our allies, and then President Trump putting a 10% tariff on everybody basically in the world, and then asking them to join with us to hold China accountable. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So they might have a plan, but I haven't seen it, and I don't really know how it's going to be implemented at this point in time. It looks like China's just kind of holding back and seeing what happens. But we'll talk to our guy at, is this the University of Minnesota or Michigan guy? You always bring in the Minnesota people. So is this Michigan this time?
This is Michigan, but still Big Ten.
All right. Well, that's good.
So yeah,
as long as he doesn't talk like a Minnesotan, we're all right.
Oh, well, I didn't turn it on very well, but there you go. There's my Minnesotan. We definitely missed an opportunity to talk about Minnesota accents with Dennis McDonough.
Yeah, there you go.
Mine won't come out if I'm talking to someone from the Midwest, but no, we're going to talk Michigan. Let's get into some of these headlines. I mean, we talk, everything you just said, talking about a plan. I saw, I watched the Sunday shows, and I saw several people say this is all going according to plan. So we'll talk with Justin too about what that plan looks like. Massive damage done to the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania after authorities say a man jumped a fence, actually lit a fire. The governor and his family were evacuated, and then police later arrested a suspect. They say that charges are coming, and they include attempted murder. We don't know a motive yet, but scary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand what's going on in Pennsylvania, but it's pretty crazy that number one, a person could do that and actually set a fire, and second of all, the fact that this is happening is not a good thing, and hopefully the person that did that will be held accountable through the courts and pay the proper punishment.
Yeah, certainly glad nobody got hurt there. Okay, we're moving right into the economy now, because that's really what the headlines are all about this morning. Ray Dalio is the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, and he was on Meet the Press this weekend. He predicted the 2008 financial disaster, and now he says he's worried about something worse than a recession. He said, quote, "We have a breaking down of the monetary order," and then compared this time period to the 1930s.
Yeah, look, we don't want a recession. We certainly don't want something worse. That's for sure. It'd be bad. And, I actually heard, I think, another person talking on the Sunday shows this weekend, Ro Khanna, and he talked about you need to have a 21st century plan. And I agree with that, actually. I think that you've got to be aware of how the economy works in the world we live today. And you got to make sure you don't screw it up. I've talked in previous episodes about potentially losing our reserve currency, which is the US dollar, which would be very, very bad for business, but that would be a further breaking down of the world economic monetary system. And I think that it's really, really important that we pay attention to this stuff, because uh, for government to put self-inflicted wounds upon the folks in the United States through inflation or recession doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't know what kind of crystal ball Ray Dalio has, but hopefully on this one, the administration can get a 21st century plan and move forward in a way that makes sense for this country and the world, because we have trading partners all over the world. And if we isolate them, it will have impacts on us. And I think that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, we talked about Signalgate and the calls for an investigation into Signalgate, which has kind of gone on the back burner because now we have multiple Democrats calling for an investigation into whether we saw insider trading last week. This includes Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Cory Booker. This is over a post that President Trump wrote on Wednesday that said, great time to buy in all caps. And then just a few hours later, that's when he said he was pausing most of those global tariffs for 90 days. He raised China's tariffs to 145%. But that led to a huge market rebound. We talked about it, a massive rebound. And then we saw a video of him in the Oval Office celebrating how much money people like Charles Schwab made. I mean, in the billions of dollars. What do you think?
So insider trading is patently illegal for people that are involved with government. It is absolutely unequivocally illegal. When you read this story, the part that struck me is that only Democrats were on that list. This is potentially an illegal activity that looks pretty obvious to me as you read the story. Why aren't there Republicans on board asking questions about this? This is really, really important to get to the bottom of, because quite honestly, it is flat illegal, and it should be illegal. You cannot manipulate the marketplace for your own advantage or your friend's own advantage. And so this is once again makes you wonder what the heck is going on. But the truth is that it looks pretty obvious to me as you read the story. It's a great time to buy, and then celebrates everybody making the money. And by the way, and people like you and I and everybody else out there don't have the capacity to go out and buy stock like some of the wealthiest people in the world do to be able to hedge the market on insider tips. This doesn't bode well, and quite honestly should not be allowed, and people should be held accountable. If it's the President of the United States or anybody else, they should be held accountable for this activity. It's illegal.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren also talked about this measure that she's backing that basically would ban members of Congress to trade on, single individual stocks. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, should happen. Absolutely. I mean, I think that quite honestly, there ought to be laws put on the books if you really want to tighten stuff up. They have to divest all their stock, elected officials. And I know it puts them at a higher standard, but they need to be at a higher standard.
Lastly, speaking of Elizabeth Warren, she called what we're seeing a game of red light, green light on this tariff situation. Not only did we see Trump back off on most of those tariffs for 90 days, but then over the weekend, for the Chinese tariffs, he said, well, we're going to put an exemption on certain electronics like phones and TVs and computers. And I know a lot of small business owners who are really upset because they import things that are not TVs and computers, and they're not happy about this.
Well, I mean, it's all uncertainty in the marketplace, and that's why when we started this conversation out, we talked about a plan. What is the plan? And the plan just isn't when the stock market goes up, yeah, we planned on that, or when the stock market went down, yeah, we figured that was going to happen. The bottom line is you got to have a plan on what you want to accomplish with these tariffs. In the end, this is a world economy we live in, like it or not. It's a world economy we live in, and if we don't deal with this stuff in a common sense way, it will end up as Ray Dalio, I believe that was his name, said, were potentially bad things, recession, depression, or worse. So, just got to get some certainty in the marketplace. That's what businesses thrive on, the certainty and predictability. So hopefully hopefully these guys will figure it out, because right now it looks pretty amateurish. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you watch 60 Minutes? I did not.
I did.
So pick up the news today, and the president's going to sue CBS. I think they sued ABC here a while back.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, there's talk about them suing CBS. Is that
Oh, I missed that headline this morning.
the reason I say that is freedom of the press is really important. I mean,
Hmm.
it's part of our Constitution, and we've had an episode on the fourth estate, right? And
Well, yeah.
we talked about how important freedom of the press is to hold people accountable. And if you're going to sue somebody every time they do a story, it puts that freedom of the press at risk.
We're seeing a lot of things like that, though. I mean, you talk about, pulling money for universities that have
Right.
had pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And when you talk about uncertainty, I kind of think about, well, what is it? What is it about this administration? And I think so much of what's being said and communicated is being done seemingly on a whim on social media. And that's what makes it so uncertain, is that we don't know what's going to come out on Truth Social or X. And speaking of X, the one headline that we didn't talk about but really should, it's a huge deal, is that the Social Security Administration is going to basically shift all of their public communications to X. And when I think about X, how many people I know who are not on X, and especially people who are probably Social Security recipients.
Maybe a one. I've never been on Facebook, and I've never been on X. Now, my office had one when I was a U.S. senator, but the truth is I wasn't on it. I had other people that were doing that stuff. And you're absolutely right. Talk about uncertainty, where you're talking about saying one thing and doing another. That's exactly what's happening here over and over and over again. If you expect people my age to get their information off of X, it's simply not going to happen. So what happens is they lose benefits. They lose benefits that they paid into, by the way, and deserve to be able to get back, because you're making it so they can't get the information because they're not using the avenues that normally people use that are my age. So it's a sad state of affairs, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember even during the pandemic, people couldn't get online to sign up for their vaccine appointments. And that was a huge problem because they couldn't get to the website or they didn't have availability. So to put all communications on X, I think we'll see a lot of fallout for that.
Yeah. And I can just say this time and time and time again. You see the administration say things that you go, I agree with that. For instance, closing the loophole of meat inspection and food inspection, and then getting rid of a bunch of FDA employees that do that inspection. Like, how are you going to close it? They're all self-inspected, not all, but they're self-inspected now. And how are you going to close those loopholes? And this goes on and on and on. There's many examples of saying, well, we're going to do this. And then, we're not going to cut veteran benefits, but then you take 50, 60,000 people and tell them to hit the road. There's no way that those veteran benefits can be administered. So in essence, you are cutting those veteran benefits, and you're not doing the things you say you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's the level of unaccountability here, from my perspective, is very, very high. And hopefully that'll change. And the reason it's high, by the way, is because my good friends on the other side of the aisle in the United States Senate and Congress in total have abrogated their duties as in the legislative branch. And there's no checks and balances. There's nobody asking tough questions except on the one side of the aisle. And that's not how it should work. It's not how it should work at all. It shouldn't be political. It's about America. It's about the United States of America. This is about our Constitution. It's about our democracy. It should be Democrats and Republicans working together to protect that.
We want to welcome our guest today to talk about all of this, Justin Wolfers, economist and public policy scholar at the University of Michigan. But Justin, I understand you also have an alter ego named Fed Lasso, and behind you have the believe sign. So tell us about Fed Lasso, how that originated.
All right. So the truth is, I'm an economics teacher, and I love to teach economics. And anything I can do to make it a little more palatable. So when the news is on the Fed, sometimes I adopt that alter ego, Fed Lasso. But right now, I think we're talking less about the Fed and a whole lot more about tariffs.
From where you're sitting, like, what's your broad view of what we're seeing here in the U.S. and in the global economy?
Chaos, painful chaos, unnecessary pain. I think the way to think about this is we're actually in the middle not of one economic crisis, but two. One crisis is tariffs. We have a tariff policy that's punitive, that hits all at once, that effectively cuts the US off from the rest of the world, that fails to recognize our place in the world and the role the rest of the world plays in running our economy. And there's so much to talk about there. The second one is a crisis of confidence, and it's a crisis of confidence in the competence of this administration. It hasn't escaped anyone's notice that the administration's view of tariffs is like my dog's view of going outside. He claws at the door, I let him out. He runs around, he yelps a bit, he attracts a lot of attention, tries to catch a groundhog or two, gets tired, comes back in, knocks on the door, says, can I come back in? Looks around the house, gets bored, says, can I go back out? And that's basically what our tariff policy has looked like. But unlike my dog, this tariff policy is also no attention to detail and no follow-through. The initial formulae on which the first sets of tariffs were based was economically indefensible, incoherent, and had every economist just scratching their heads. The level at which these tariffs were set, they were called reciprocal tariffs, but actually they were tariffs 10 to 20 times larger than those of any of our trading partners. And so every part of this process, I think, has led people in financial markets, economists, businesses, and even mums and dads out there to scratch their heads and say, by jingo, I worry about the folks steering this ship. And so that's a second economic shock. And so what you've seen is not just the tariffs shoot up and concerns from business, but you've seen consumer confidence plummet, absolutely fall off the map in recent days. You've seen fears about inflation returning. You've seen fears about higher unemployment. And so at the moment, we know the American population is on tenterhooks. Part of that's the tariffs and part of it's the Keystone cops in charge of the economy.
And you're exactly right. If you take a look back when President Trump was sworn in, correct me if I'm wrong on this, we had the best economy in the world in the United States of America.
Yeah, and much.
Yeah, and now we're being it put into turmoil because of all the things you talked about. I want to ask about, I mean, we've heard from the administration, at least I've heard from the administration, from what I've read, is that they want to do two things with the tariffs. They want to get more manufacturing back in the United States. And look, from my perspective, there's some merit to that, particularly on things like prescription drugs, which should be manufactured here. And the second thing they want to do is they want to open up the markets more, the China's market, because we're not in there as much as we could be, and which is also, from my perspective, pretty good. But I don't see, and you correct me if I'm wrong with this, because I'm a dirt farmer and a musician, so I'm more of a dirt farmer than a musician anymore. So when you put tariffs on everybody basically around the world, and then you really put the tariffs on China, how do we expect to put pressure on China to be able to do the things we want them to do? In other words, give up some of their manufacturing so it moves to the United States and open their markets up to more of our products. How is that going to work when you're really putting tariffs on everybody in the world and pissing everybody off?
Yeah. So, John, there's a couple of comments there and I want to take them in turn. So the first of all is, this is a tariff policy in search of a rationale. So at various points we've heard this is about national defense. But if it was about national defense, you would put maybe tariffs on metals manufacturing, but why leather saddles? Maybe it's about illegal immigration, but if it were about illegal immigration, why does it move beyond the southern border? It was about a fentanyl crisis, but we put tariffs on Canada, where we send them more fentanyl than they send us, as well as Mexico. It was about raising tax revenue. But if it is about raising tax revenue, this is the most regressive tax. This not only is the largest tax hike in a generation, it's the most regressive because it's essentially a flat tax. So working class families buy food from Mexico just as much as rich families do, but it's a whole heck of a lot bigger share of their budget. It's about bilateral trade negotiations and getting a better deal. That's what you were referring to. But if that were the case, why would you put a tariff on Australia where you already had a free trade agreement? We heard it's about the US budget deficit, but of course, actually, that's completely unrelated to trade. That's simply the incoherence of someone who doesn't understand economics. And I'm waiting to hear that it's a cure for toe fungus as well. The two that you mentioned in particular, let's start with manufacturing. Look, there are deep questions, and I do hope that Democrats take these questions seriously about whether it is something we should encourage. Manufacturing is the sort of thing that East Coast guys in suits in big, tall buildings think that working and middle-class Americans in the Midwest really ought to do. But if you talk to manufacturing workers and you to ask them about their aspirations for their kids, it's not going into the factory. It's joining the knowledge economy. And so I worry a lot about this. It's become a given in American politics that more manufacturing is good. But every time you walk into a manufacturing plant, I'm not sure I want my kids to come home with soot on their clothes at the end of the day. That and the future of manufacturing, frankly, is robots. So we're going to build enormous factories with full employment for robots, but it's not really going to help American workers. But if you did want to affect manufacturing, if you did, even if we took all that for granted, what you would do, the theory of the case from the Trump administration is we're going to make it expensive to buy manufactured goods from abroad. Therefore, people are going to set up factories in America. Okay, fair enough. But notice, if I'm thinking about building a factory in America, it's going to take me 3 years to stand the factory up. The factory will then be in operation for decades. So what matters for my decision is not the tariff rate on Tuesday. It's the tariff rate 3 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and so on. What Trump has done, though, is he moves the tariff rate on Wednesday, and then he undoes it on Thursday, and then bangs it back on Friday, and then undoes it on Saturday. The thing that really matters is the expectation of future tariff rates. Because of the way he's gone about this, he hasn't changed at all. So what that means is that we're going to get all the costs of these tariffs, that we're going to pay higher prices and distortions to the way we do things, but none of the benefits, because there's not a single factory on earth that's going to break ground based on a promise from a guy who breaks promises every day of the week. That's manufacturing. Let me pause there. Well, let's do manufacturing. You can tell I got a lot to say here.
I like it. I'm learning so much and thinking about this in a way that I hadn't. I appreciate it.
So let's dig into manufacturing, then we'll come back to China, which was the other question that you raised.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I think you're 100% correct. You want your kids to be doctors and lawyers and musicians and those kind of things. You don't necessarily see them working in a factory. I do think, though, there are certain things, prescription drugs being one,
absolutely,
that are pretty critical to be manufactured here, because you don't want to be held hostage by another country on those kind of things. And there's some other things that are critical too. As far as the defense spending goes, we need to make everything here, and then our military-industrial complex where it needs to be to supply everything to the extent we need it to. But that's being worked on for the last 10, 15 years. I mean, so that's not something that's new to this party. So yeah, I hear you, but you're right. In the list, I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast again to see the list of things that you talked about, whether it's, balance of the budget or whether it's something else that fentanyl or immigration or whatever that the tariffs are supposed to fix that haven't. But the manufacturing piece is an important one, because I think people want to go back to the time where we're making all our cars here and all our clothes here and everything else here, which isn't necessarily bad, but we don't have enough work to build the job we've gotten out. Isn't that correct?
Right. So let me start on the nostalgia piece and then talk about the workforce. So this is actually very reminiscent of debates we were having in the United States about 80 years ago, because it used to be we had an agricultural economy. We mostly were growing food. You'd know a thing or two about that. And what happened was we got so good at growing food, it didn't take many Americans to do that. So we moved from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy. And the manufacturing economy through the 1950s really raised the American middle class. But through that period, there were lots of people saying, this is outrageous. We're not growing our own food. We lack national security without food security. And there was this nostalgia for going back to agriculture. So during the manufacturing boom, we weren't excited about this boom. We were nostalgic about what we left behind. Let's move forward. What we have today is a boom in knowledge work, right? Whether it's AI or computers or software engineers or just structural engineers. And our manufacturing, like agriculture a decade ago has gotten so efficient and so mechanized, right? We're actually producing more out of our factories than we ever have before, just with fewer people, right? And so that means the manufacturing sector has naturally shrunk. And we're moving into knowledge work. And so the question is, why do we want to be nostalgic for the 1950s? Was it really so good? I asked that as a question. There are a variety, different people may come to different answers, but I wanted to throw that parallel out there for people to think about. And then, with manufacturing, some parts of it are really quite valuable and maybe we want to have onshore. You talked about strategic things. That potentially suggests a role for certain narrowly focused strategic objectives. Now, you said we want to bring all defense onshore. I don't know. I'm kind of okay if the Canadians make our bombs for us, because I'm a guy who thinks we should be friends with Canada forever. It turns out the White House does not currently feel that way, but we don't need 100% independence on everything unless we plan on going to war with everyone at the same time.
Well, the Canadians love themselves some John Tester, and it's mutual. He loves Canadians too.
And I would also say, not because of your accent, but the Aussies too. The Australians play a really, really important role in our national defense and in manufacturing stuff with AUKUS. It was done during the Biden administration. I don't know if it's still going now, because it seems as though this administration doesn't like democracies and only likes dictatorships. See the president of El Salvador coming to an Oval Office piece. I mean, this is crazy stuff.
I can share with your listeners, I spend a lot of time talking to the Australians. It's where I'm from. I spent a fair bit of time talking to the Canadians. The Australians are pissed. Yeah. And I think it's really important that Americans, for a moment, put yourself in the shoes of our allies. They're pissed and they're confused. Pissed is a technical economics term. It means frustrated. Because for generations, we've done everything the United States asked of us. We've sent soldiers to American wars. We've allowed bases and monitoring, and we've been part of a big part of the American defense. We signed a free trade agreement, and we've abided by it every single day of that agreement. We've been the fiercest friends and allies the United States could possibly have, and all of a sudden, there's a 10% tariff on everything from Australia. It's puzzling. Now, that's the Australian problem. The Canadian problem is far worse, which is, yes, it's a bad idea to mess with your allies. It actually makes it harder to come up with better deals. But what Trump did for giggles with Canada, calling the Prime Minister governor and referring to them as the 51st state, people have pride. And it is much harder now for the next Canadian Prime Minister to make any concessions to a government that the Canadian people profoundly dislike and feel disrespected by. So those tweets have actually cost your listeners money, because they're going to lead to harder negotiations, worse deals, and less favorable relations between the US and Canada. So maybe they were funny to read, but there are families struggling to put food on the table, and you just made it a little bit harder.
So, but before we get to Marie's side, I just want to go back to the one other point I brought up, and that was opening up markets in China for U.S. goods.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, if that's possible, and what we should be doing actually to maximize that opportunity, if that opportunity is there.
Look, the most important thing to understand, I want to broaden it from China to every country. You just said, let's open up markets. That's really been the guiding principle of American trade policy for a century now. A century. 80 years. It's a great idea. Here's the thing listeners need to understand. Because we've been doing it decade after decade after decade after decade, almost every country was already charging the United States either no tariffs or nearly no tariffs. The truth is, we had access to almost every international market. The problem is, during Trump's youth, we didn't have access. And so this is a trade war. They're ripping us off. They're screwing us, blah, blah, blah. That reflects the fundamental misunderstanding of just one fact. Global trade had become approximately free. Look, it wasn't exactly free because for the same reasons that it's not from the United States, which is basically you put a prime minister and a president of any two countries in a room and you say, "Look, what do we want to do?" And they say, "Let's do business with each other." And they say, "Okay, I'll drop tariffs on you if you drop tariffs on me." And then one of them will say, "Well, okay, but I've got a couple of politically powerful groups back home and I got to help them out." And John, you know enough about agriculture, someone or in our agricultural sector. And so the other prime minister will then say, "Oh yeah, I got a couple of guys at home too, Canadian dairy farmers. So let's make it no tariffs, but I'll put an asterisk and you put an asterisk." And that's basically what NAFTA was. And it's basically what the USMCA is. And it's basically what the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement is. And the United States had existing free trade agreements with about 30 other countries. And even those we didn't have free trade agreements with, that's basically what countries were doing anyway, because they understood the logic of opening up and finding bigger and better markets. And so what that then means is this is a trade war that's fighting yesterday's problem. In fact, 1950s problem. And that in turn means that if we win this trade war, it's almost impossible to move tariffs from nearly zero to much lower. So even if we win almost nothing. And if we lose, or along the way, what we're doing, we have 125% tariffs on China. And you know whose country is looking at a recession right now? Ours. It's incredibly costly. So I'm all in favor of opening up foreign markets, but let's realize they're actually kind of already mostly there, or they certainly were 3 weeks ago.
So Justin, how permanent is the damage here? I mean, what will it take to turn this around? Like if everything stopped tomorrow and we had certainty and the red light, green light game stopped, what would it take for our trading partners to trust us again?
So what would it take for, well, let me just give you a forecast that I like to give. If Trump persists on the current path, I think there's a 75% chance we're in recession within a year. If he backs away completely, I think we're only a 25% chance. So some of the damage has been done. And if he does sort of something in the middle, the chances will be somewhere in the middle, right? Maritza, you asked, how much of the damage has already been done? Well, you know, it's kind of like ask Donald Trump's fourth wife. Do you trust him? Any deal he does is not worth the paper it's written on. You know, the guy arrived to NAFTA, having been signed by Clinton, rips it up, starts a trade war, basically sticky tapes it back together and gives it a new brand name. So now we have the USMCA. The guy arrives in power the second time, rips it up, starts a trade war, and you know the next act, right? He's just going to sticky tape it back together and rebrand it. So, but I wouldn't want to place reliance on this agreement because he has shown he has no willingness to abide by agreements that he makes. That's not really a problem because it's going to be term limited and it's only 3.5 years left. There's a deeper problem.
Well, he says it's not. They're jacking about a third term, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to stick to economics, which is the thing I know. There's a deeper problem. The American people have shown themselves willing to elect people who will rip up our international agreements. And so even when Trump disappears, the electorate does not. And so unless we as a people really turn around and show the world the era of Trumpism and of this sort of glib policymaking on the run and an era in which you want to bully the rest of the world, unless we show the rest of the world that era is over, trust in the United States will be low for decades. And our political institutions have shown themselves incapable of taming an autocratic leader. That's not true for a country like Australia or a country like Britain. Liz Truss came to power in Britain, had an absurd economic plan. It was going to create all sorts of problems, and she was gone by the end of the week. What we have with Trump is someone who's meant to be answerable to Congress, particularly when it comes to power over tariffs, and Congress is incapable of acting. And so it's not just that our political institutions are damaged, it's that other people understand that, and that makes us less reliable going forward. The pain that we've caused Canada, like think about literally the existential pain of having the military we have and joking about taking it by force. No one hears that as being funny. And so that relationship, as is our relationship with Greenland, is forever going to be under a cloud. These are going to be costs that you can't easily see, but relative to a world in which this hadn't happened, we would have been more integrated in the world, we would be more natural leaders for the rest of the world. The world wouldn't be looking elsewhere for friends and allies and moving a step closer to China, which is what they're all currently doing.
And more than one step too. I've seen multiple steps towards China.
Yeah, China has been more reliable.
We saw National Economic Director Kevin Hassett on CNN over the weekend on the Sunday show. And he said that people shouldn't be surprised by what's happening if they would stop and study this. So you're an econ professor. Is that the problem?
Yeah, no, that's just an absurd lie on its face. The fact that Jamison Greer, the US trade representative, is literally testifying before Congress while they're changing tariff policy and no one told the US trade representative halfway through the press conference. The Sunday shows have been amazing and revealing because what they've done, they've been terribly worried. Basically, every week for the past 3 weeks, we hit Friday and the economy's in crisis because they've changed direction 3 different times. They send their cabinet secretaries out to the different Sunday shows where each of them on a different channel is telling a different story, singing from a different hymn book. The other day, we were told by Secretary Bessent that the plan all along was to back down on the tariffs. He said that on a Wednesday, having gone on the Sunday shows and told us that wasn't the case, which means either I'm forced to believe he lied to the American public for 3 days in a row, or he lied when he said he was lying to the American public for 3 days in a row. There's a huge problem here, which is credibility from your economic officials is deeply important because there are moments when the economy could all of a sudden be on the brink. And what the Treasury Secretary's job to do is to walk out and say, we've got you. We'll do whatever it takes. I've got the team. You can trust me. And they can rebuild confidence and pull the economy back from the brink. But if that guy has lied to you 5 Sundays in a row, then we don't have that capacity. And so I pray that we don't have one of these crises that requires a steady hand and faith in the Treasury Secretary or faith in the National Economic Council, because they've blown the credibility. That credibility belongs to us. It's ammunition to be used in an important economic emergency, and they've blown it for very, very short-term political gain. And if I sound angry, it's because I am.
So what are your thoughts on Democrats calling for an investigation into all of this and into possible insider trading or market manipulation after we saw that? I liked your dog analogy. Go outside, come back in, go outside, come back in.
Look, there's a bunch of things going on here, and I worry. Look, I'm not going to give anyone political advice. It is true that when Trump tweets 15 minutes before backing off the tariffs, 15 minutes before he tweets buy stocks now, if any of the rest of us did that, we'd be in jail already. Unquestionably the case. So you could launch an investigation into that. And the very best you'd discover is at the end of this is the guy's a felon. We're kind of already there. So I don't want to give you political advice. I think it was I think it was an unethical thing to do. I think it was an illegal thing to do. I think it's bad for the functioning of markets. And I also think it helps Donald Trump because it means now we pay even closer attention to him. And it means next time he says this stock is underbought, you're kind of going to be thinking, is he giving me a hint? Am I going to go and buy what he tells me to buy? Like now it makes a little bit of sense to do so. But the thing that really upsets me is 3 months ago, we had a healthy economy. Nothing external happened. What we have is self-inflicted wounds that are going to make it harder for families to get by. And that is not just an economic problem, it's a moral outrage to me that is far greater and far more important than, that particular illegality.
I just think everything that you said, Fed or Justin, however we want to be addressed, is 100% correct. I mean, these wounds are all self-inflicted, and the people who are going to pay the price for this are the American citizens. I mean, there will be prices paid worldwide, but the people I live with are going to be paying more more money for their product, whether they're in agriculture, in business, working families, whoever they are. And that's really unfortunate, considering that when this administration took over, we had the best economy in the world. And that's just all self-inflicted wounds, had nothing to do with anything else other than just government policy and uncertainty, which makes the business climate really, really, really difficult to try to get through.
And I want to ask about, I mean, we talk about these self-inflicted wounds and what it's going to mean for, working American families. So I want to ask about price increases, Justin, because I had a friend bring up this idea that, once prices go up for any reason, do we really see these big companies lower them again when conditions improve? They generally kind of stay there. Is that any different here? Do you think that if we see prices go up because of, tariff surcharges, that we'll ever see the prices come back down?
It's a really good question. And Maritza, what I want to do is broaden it, which is we're worried about tariffs causing inflation. And I want to point out that tariff-induced inflation is different to most inflation. Because basically we put a cost on. So what I do think is true, I wouldn't normally say this, is if we put a tariff on and it's on for a month, prices will rise. And if we took it off straight away, they may actually fall back down. I'm kind of optimistic that would happen. We had tariffs under the first Trump administration on washing machines. They put the tariff on, the price of washing machines went up $100. They took the tariff off, the price of washing machines fell $100. Let me point something else out, by the way. People often say to me, well, if you don't want to pay higher prices, buy American. That shows a misunderstanding of how markets work. Because when we put tariffs on foreign-made washing machines made by Samsung and LG, they raised their prices by $100. Guess what Maytag and GM and the other American manufacturers did? When your competition jacks up your prices, it's a good excuse to jack up yours, and they raise their prices by $100. So there's no escaping this. And also, by the way, when you say, let's buy American, when you jack up the price of coffee, have you tried to buy American-made coffee? They make it in Kona, but they make about 1% of our American coffee, which means either we're all going to have to give up coffee, 1 in 100 people gets to keep drinking coffee, or we're just going to have to keep paying the higher prices for the imported coffee, right? So there's no easy way to escape these tariffs. Second thing I want to say that's different. Normally when we have inflation, and this happened during the Great Recession, what happens is prices rise. And because prices rise, your employer is actually taking in more revenue. That means the value of your work measured in dollars just went up. And so your employer now really needs to make sure that you're happy and that you're not going to move. So what happens is prices rise, and then you get a cost of living adjustment to your wages. So prices and wages move up in concert normally, which means that your spending power remains roughly the same. So you don't actually lose anything. Now, what I just said is approximately right. It takes a while sometimes for your wages to catch up. So inflation can be kind of frustrating while you wait for those cost of living adjustments, but on average, they tend to come through okay. So usually, if you thought the pandemic inflation was painful, realize that in fact, wages caught up to prices eventually. With a tariff-induced inflation, it's totally different. Because what's happened now is your employer, in order to import goods across the border, their costs have gone up. And that's why the prices went up. There's no extra money left over to pay you more for the work that you're doing. And so your prices go up, but your wages don't go up. And so what you have is that your that is your inflation-adjusted wages, fall, and they remain low, not for 1 or 2 years, but in an enduring or persistent sense. And so this sort of inflation will actually steal your your spending power and do so for many, many years.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up here. You are shaping the minds of our future here and working with our future, our American students at the University of Michigan. So as you're watching this play out and talking to students, what's the best question that they've asked you about all this?
I'm going to give you the best answer they gave me.
Okay.
Which is, they tell me they've learned that economics really matters. It's never been a better time to be an economics teacher because my students are leaning in and they're saying, oh my goodness, the concepts we're learning in class If only the president understood them, we would avoid a recession. And so can you imagine the power of a single idea that could save the US economy $2 trillion, that could keep millions of people in work, that could prevent inequality from unnecessarily rising? And then when we keep people in work, that prevents divorces and suicides and hardship and hunger. What we do really matters. And so I love the fact that the present moment has taught our students that economics is important. And I also love the fact that citizens, the folks who are going to listen to this podcast, are leaning in a little harder on economics. And it's important that they do so, because the only way this ends well is when Congress wrests back power from the White House. And Congress is very responsive to you. So there's a whole bunch of people I'd be happy to make unemployed. They're the people who are not being responsive and not being responsible and creating bad economic policy. And that's what listeners can help do.
Appreciate you being with us, Justin. Thank you very, very much. It's been great to listen to you and listen to your perspectives. And I wish I had disagreed with all of them, but unfortunately I don't. Damn it.
Great pleasure, guys.
Okay. I mean, I just like that conversation. I could listen to him go on all day because he really breaks it down in such simple and funny ways.
Yeah, it's good. I bet he's a great teacher for sure. I bet he's good, but he has those kids riveted for sure.
So what's your big takeaway?
The last thing he said, I mean, everything he said was spot on about the economy and how it's attractive by other countries and how our friends play a big role in everything we do. But the last thing he said was spot on, and that was Congress needs to get off their ass and do something, because they haven't been. And, you can talk about they're doing the reconciliation bill and all that stuff. Well, that's going to add to the national debt the way I've read it. But that aside, they need to hold the executive branch accountable. It's their job. They can't wait for the courts to do it. The courts are going to do what the courts are going to do. The Constitution is clear, 3 co-equal branches of government. And the legislative branch, as we've said for the last 11 weeks, has been AWOL, and they need to step up. And so for the listeners out there, double down, keep sending those emails to those folks. I know they're not doing town halls, and we're doing town halls with them in absentia, but the truth is that they've got to start hearing from their constituents that, quite frankly, going into a recession or having inflation or, pissing off all our trade partners around the world is not something that we should be doing. And especially when the plan is everywhere from soup to nuts moving forward. So the last thing he said about Congress needs to do their job is absolutely 100% correct. They need to do their job.
Yeah, we have one listener who has sent us the correspondence she keeps getting back from her senators. And basically it's just the same boilerplate response to every question she asks. But we keep telling people, well, keep writing, keep calling, let people know, no matter what you believe, this is part of the system. You let your representatives know what's important to you.
You continue to make contact, somebody's reading them or you wouldn't get a response. And then I always go back to what Steve Schmidt said on a podcast we had a month or two ago, and that was, they're all flying, catch them at the airport. When they're coming in, they're going out. That's another possibility.
I know. I think about that all the time too. But then somebody said, what if my senator is flying a private plane?
Well, there's also those private places, those jet stop places that they use to get off to. I mean, you still got to land the damn thing somewhere, and they're not landing them in Big Sandy. I guarantee you that.
I just wanted to share one comment from a listener on Spotify. She said, John, you actually helped my daughter with her tax return. Someone called me right away. She got a refund. You've helped me and my clients so many times, and I miss you being in office. So we keep getting messages like that. People.
I would say a couple of things. First of all, we did great constituency work because of the staff that I had. They really did a really marvelous job. And the second thing I will say is DOGE goes in and does all these cuts to all the agencies, whether it's IRS or we're going to be talking about the BLM here in a few days. All this has impacts. And, people be able to get their tax refunds. That's an impact. People be able to go out and utilize our public lands. That's another impact. And right down the line, better be able to get their their benefits that they've earned, not that they're given, that they're earned. It's another impact. And the list goes on and on and on. So, look, people had trouble, but I thought it was part of my job as a United States Senator to work as a conduit between the agencies and other people. And I had a great staff that did a lot of really good work on that.
Yeah, your staff was always so responsive. Okay, you are in New York City and you're going to walk out of your hotel with a Pep's Big Sandy hat. Are you going to vouch for that? I can read it. It's close.
You didn't say M, son. And this is pretty good. You're getting better. Yeah, well, I've got 2 Pep Big Sandy hats, and this is a bowling alley and bar and restaurant in Big Sandy, Montana, that does a great job. They make the best pizzas in the state of Montana. So I encourage everybody to go have a pizza at Pep's.
Pep's is going to be...
Maybe have a libation too if you're not driving. How's that? So
yeah, that's good. Pep's is going to be inundated with grounded.
God, I hope so. I hope so. They need the economic development. So it all works.
I like it. I like it. Okay. Thank you so much for spending some of your day with us. You can find us on Substack, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube. You can send us an email at groundedpcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much to our guest. Just a fascinating guy, Fed Lasso, aka Justin Wolfers. Thanks to our friends at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music. And to all of you, our listeners, we'll chat again soon. Hope you have a great day in the Big Apple, Senator.
Yeah, that'll be help.